Okay, as promised, I was going to show you how I do a fabric one. It's a slightly different technique, but it is possible to do in fabric. So I've got a front and a back that have been interfaced with a woven fusible interfacing. So this is just ordinary quilting weight cotton. And I could, if I wanted to, use the cutouts that I've made from my one of my faux leather ones, and I can position them onto my fabric. But in this instance, I want to use different colours for the various parts of the design. Now, I've only ever done this using this design, so you could do it with any of the others, but I just never have done. So, but I want to show you how I do it with this because I just think it's easiest. Now, the first thing I do is I carefully cut out one side, one part of the design, so the first bit that I'm going to use, and I'm going to start with the, you can see I'm starting with the exterior piece. So there we go, that's the piece. And I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use this green colour. So I've got two pieces of faux leather, and one side on each of them has a really clear straight edge. So I'm going to actually put, and I've cut that with a rotary cutter so that I know it's straight. So I'm going to put those right sides together, and I'm going to take my template and I'm going to lay that. Very difficult to show you, but I am going to show you. I'm just going to do it to me, and then I'm going to turn it around so you can see. I'm going to just clip it onto that straight edge. So I've got two pieces of faux leather that are right sides together. I've got the two straight edges right together, literally butted up together, and I've added my template onto the top. Now, I am going to cut this with scissors, so I am basically just going to trim off both ends, cutting through both layers of faux leather, and then using one cut. So now I've got lots of little scrappy bits which I can put in my scrap box for future reference. So now I have two pieces cut from one template, but because they were cut with right sides together, they are now actually the opposite of each other. So if I put my template over there, pull those apart, you can see that they are the opposite of each other. So they're two, let's just hold them up, two slightly different shapes. So I'm going to pop those on my table, and I just generally lay them on my table in the position that they're more or less in the design. And then I'm just going to continue on and do exactly the same thing with the other three sort of side pieces, if you like, because colour should we go for the next one? Let's go for pink. So again, matching the straight edges that I cut with a rotary cutter, popping the template on so that it's butted up to those straight edges, to that straight edge. I mean, if you want to cut them individually, you can do. This is how I did it. This way I felt that I was most in control. You could, of course, just put the template onto your faux leather and cut round it using in the same technique as we used to cut the original design, but I just find this easier, especially since I like to use different colours to coordinate with the fabric. And then we have the next piece, again, two pieces of faux leather, one template. And then we have they are the opposite of each other. So I can lay those down, go on to the next piece. Now, I think it's probably quite clear to you now that this is not reverse applique, doing it with fabric. This is applique. So the technique is placing fabric on top as opposed to behind. You can do reverse applique with fabric, but it's a much more complicated technique. It's used a lot in quilting, but it's not something that I think works very well, particularly with bags, unless you're making a quilted bag. So we've got pink. So let's go for the sort of aqua green colour. Again, making sure that those flat edges, those straight edges that I'd cut with a rotary cutter are exactly together. Taking the template, butting it up against the edge. A couple of clips just to hold everything in place. Bottom done. Top done. If you wanted to do this with a rotary cutter, you could do, but I just think it's easier to cut the two pieces at the same time. You know then that they are the exact opposite of each other. And then there we go, that's that one. So then we've got the next one. And you can do as much or as little of this design on fabric as you want to, really. I tend to not do the very skinny bits. I tend to do just the bits that I want. I'll put the circle, or the oval, should I say, in the bottom. And the sort of fan part, but not the others. Other bits, it's up to you. And in theory, you can do this with all of the designs. However, getting the others onto your faux leather in a kind of orderly fashion is not that easy. So this one works well for this, whereas the others are not quite as easy. So I'm sticking with the one that's the least, will offer the path of least resistance and be least complicated to do for those of you that want to do fabric. And in theory, you can use cork, or you could use real leather, or you could use cordura, or you could use any non-fraying fabric to do this. However, you cannot do these applique parts in another fabric unless you're planning on leaving them raw edge, which is a technique, but it's not one that I particularly like. So this is as near to all fabric as I'm prepared to go. So I'm laying those out. Then I have my central panel. Because you've already done two together, you don't need these ones on this side, so let's not worry about those. Let's just now with this central panel, if you feel confident that you can cut with scissors, then do so. If you don't, then use a rotary cutter. So you can just use a little bit of masking tape or decorator's tape to fix this to your faux leather. Then you can use your ruler. Let's just get it out of the way. I think I'm on a bit of a bump there, so just your ruler and rotary cutter. Certainly to cut the long sides, because you might find that they look a bit wonky else. And there we have the central part. Now I am just going to grab another little bit of that purple, because I'm going to use purple to do the oval part at the bottom, and that's all I'm going to do on this. I'm not messing around doing any of the really tiny bits. You can if you want to. And I'm literally just holding this in place as I cut. You can use a bit of tape or spray adhesive on the if you want to cut it from the reverse, it's not a problem. It's what you feel most comfortable with. Just got a couple of little jaggedy bits there that will annoy me. So there we go. All these bits of paper that I've got. And the cutting marks gone. So now you have all of the component parts of your design. Now, depending on how well you think you can attach these, will depend on what technique you use. So I am just going to move those out of the way and grabbing my exterior fabric, and I'm going to do the same markings as we've done on our faux leather. So I'm going to do a mark. I need to just move that though. This is an inch away from the bottom edge, and then 6 1/4 inches in from the side to give me my central mark. And in theory I should be able to work from that. So what I will say I do use is a lot of spray adhesive at this point, so I just need to find my piece of paper that I'm using for my spray adhesive. And I'm going to start with this central piece, because I know, sorry, these two central pieces, because I know that those will sit on that central line. So if I start with my circle, or the oval rather, I'm just going to spray a little bit of spray adhesive onto the reverse. I'm going to carefully pick it up, and you do tend to get a bit sticky fingers when you're doing this. And I'm going to position it onto that 1 inch line centrally, and then just push it down. So that's now sitting on there. I'm going to take that part, which I know will sit just above it, and bearing in mind that I haven't got the little hump bit on there, I can position this as high or as low as I want to. So I can, you know, I can move it so that it's 1/2 inch above, or make it closer if I want to. The positioning and the measuring of this bit is really very much up to you. So again, a little bit of spray adhesive, and position it centrally, and you've got that central line to give you a visual clue as to where you're going. Now, if you're not sure that you can actually physically measure something for the gaps between each piece, what you can do is take a little piece of paper or card, and I mean, I'm going to make this, the gap between these 1/8 of an inch. So basically, cut a strip of paper or cardstock that is 1/8 of an inch wide, and you can use that as a template between the pieces if you're not sure you can eyeball it. Now I've stuck my cutting that to my paper. Let's get rid of these things. So I'm happy with the positioning of my central pieces. So I'm now going to take the next pieces out. So this is my pink pieces. Now, I feel happy that I can eyeball them and I can put them as far or as close together as I want to. If you're not happy, then cut yourself a strip, and that could be 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. You can butt that strip up to the piece that you've already got on, and then position your next piece right up against it. Now, if I just, actually the best thing I can do is actually stick this one down so that you can see what I'm talking about, so I can lift it up, because if I lift it up, it's all going to fall off. Okay, my paper's not stuck down, but you can see I've positioned my second piece, my pink piece, and it's 1/8 of an inch away, and I'm using my little bit of paper template to make sure that it's the same distance. I will do exactly the same on the other side when I position the pink piece on the other side. So I'm just going to carry on and stick the next piece down. If you haven't got spray adhesive, you can use a glue stick, so Pritt stick or one of the preparatory sort of glue sticks on the back of the faux leather. It just holds it in place and makes sure that things stay where they need to be. And although you can reposition, obviously if you do start repositioning this too much, you'll find that your front fabric, your main fabric, will get a bit sticky. So you don't want to be repositioning too often. So that's my first two pieces. I'm going to use my little piece of paper again. So if you prefer, you can eyeball this. You don't have to do it this way. This is just, if you've got kind of OCD tendencies, then people get really frustrated if it's not exactly perfect. To be honest, a fraction of an inch isn't going to notice, but it is nice to have it all sitting perfectly. And using just that little bit of a guide does help. And I'm lucky because my fabric is actually stripy that I can actually use the stripes in the fabric as well to help me to ensure that I've got everything symmetrical. So that's my next lot. A little bit of, let's pop my 1/8 of an inch piece right up against it. The other possibility is if you were to print the template out again, you can actually lay and cut the template, just the template, using a craft knife. You could lay the template onto your fabric and then put the pieces into the holes, which would also give you good, accurate spacing. However, I do think that that's a lot of work. And you're already going to be doing an awful lot of work stitching all of these in place, so try and be as accurate as you can. And it will pay dividends. Doing this slowly is definitely the way forwards. This isn't a technique or a thing that you can rush. Making the actual bag itself is really quite quick. So don't worry that you're going to be spending hours and hours and hours, and you're never going to recoup your money if you're making to sell, because you can make up your time a bit further on. And that's my last piece on. And there we go. I've used my little bit of paper just to give me accurate gaps between each piece. And all of my pieces are now in position. And then all I'm going to do is exactly the same as we've already done, in so much as that rather than stitching around the outside of the apertures, I'm going to stitch on the very edge of each piece. So this is applique as opposed to reverse applique, but this is raw edge faux leather applique, so it really is the most basic version. So again, 1/8 of an inch in from the very edge of your applique piece, and just very carefully and slowly stitch them down, leaving long threads top and bottom. Again, using a Teflon foot because you are stitching on faux leather. Excuse me. And again, taking your time. You're just going to go round and you're going to stitch each of those pieces down. Now, I'm using the same colour thread as the faux leather. You could use an alternative colour thread if you wanted to. Depends how brave you are and depends how confident you are that you can get good quality top stitching. I've got a tickle this morning. Finishing off in the same hole as you started. I need a glass of water, I think. And again, burying your threads. Now, you will have gotten used to this by now. Those of you that have been with me for a while will know that we bury threads a lot. Oh, goodness me. So taking your threads from the front of your work through to the back of your work and then tying them off. Now I'm just going to change my threads for each part, but you can see basically that that's now attached, and I'm staying 1/8 of an inch away from the very edge of the fabric of the faux leather, so that we don't get any curly edges, because there's nothing worse than having faux leather curling up where it's not attached closely. Again, I'm using quite a short stitch so that I can get into the corners rather than using a very long stitch, which is what I would normally use for top stitching. I'm just about a 3. And that's what suits me. If you prefer to use something a little bit longer, because this is all straight edges on this one, apart from that curve at the bottom, you could use slightly longer for these parts and then a shorter stitch for the curved one. It's up to you. So that's the start of our fabric one, and I'll come back and when we do the overlay for the pocket, exactly the same technique will apply for all of the bag. So from this point onwards, I'll just be using either this one or the faux leather one, because the construction is exactly the same. I will say that if you're going to use fabric, you will probably need to use something more substantial than fusible fleece, because fabric doesn't have the same body as faux leather, unless you're using a heavier weight sort of upholstery grade fabric. And the one that I had in the pictures was made from It was made from it's upholstery fabric, but it was from a sample book, so it's quite a thick but quite a loose weave. And I used one layer of foam as stabilizer in that. I did use a woven interfacing on it, but I used only one layer of foam. And we will talk about a little bit more about the options for foam or fusible fleece as we go on, because there are lots of options and you have to choose your option based on A, your fabric, and B, your machine's capabilities. So we'll talk about interfacing and stabilizer a little bit more in depth in the next videos.